Though years would pass before March Madness became a basketball craze across the United States, in 1978 the sport was alive and well in California. Local leagues and neighborhood pickup games were a wholesome way to pass the time, and community teams like the Gateway Gators gave guys a chance to stay active and create friendships away from home and work. On February 25th, Gary Dale Mathias, Jack Madriga, Jackie Hewitt, Theodore Ted Wire, and William Sterling were scheduled to play in a tournament that, if they won, would give them a free week stay in Los Angeles and a trip to Disneyland. Tragically, the friends never made it to the basketball court, and the reasons why remain a terrible mystery. This is their story: the baffling case of the Yuba County Five. On February 24th, the night before their tournament, the boys, as their families called them, were heading up to Cal State in Chico, 50 miles north, to see the Chico State Wildcats play the UC Davis Aggies. This group of 5 friends knew each other from working and hanging out together at the Gateway Center, a vocational rehabilitation facility in Yuba City for disabled adults. All of them lived with their parents and extended families, but they were still highly functional. Ted was working at PG&E with his best friend Jackie. Gary worked for his stepfather's gardening business, and Bill and Jack worked at Sunsweet Growers. Gary and Jack were perhaps the most capable of the bunch. They were both Army veterans and licensed drivers. The friends drove up to Chico in Jack's blue and white 1969 Mercury Montego, just like any other young men out for fun on a Friday night. As fans of the winning team, they were in high spirits when the final buzzer sounded the Aggies' victory over the Wildcats, 98-86. After leaving the stadium and driving a few blocks, Jack pulled over at Bears Market, and the friends picked up some candy bars, fruit pies, sodas, and milk while they annoyed the clerk, who was trying to close the shop. Snacks in hand, they got back in the car and headed south, never to be seen again. By morning, the boys' mothers were worried. They expected to see them back around midnight, and Bill's mom, Juanita, had been up since 2 a.m., waiting for him to get home. Ted's mother, Imogene, had startled awake just before dawn and noticed his bed was empty. She called Juanita, who had already called Jack Madriga's mother, to check on her son. As the parents continued to reach out to family members, it became clear that the boys had disappeared. They called friends who spent the day looking for the car on the highways between the Yuba Flatlands and Chico. By 8 p.m., the families were frantic. The boys had missed their tournament, and no one had called to say where they were. Jack's mother called the police. Although Ted, Jackie, Bill, Jack, and Gary each had their challenges, their absence was out of character. They all got along well with their families. Ranging in age from 24 to 32 years old, they had complementary talents that helped them compensate for each other's difficulties when they spent time together. Although Jack had a low IQ, he was relatively skilled, fun to be around, capable of good judgment, and relatively independent. He was best friends with Bill, who had grown up as a hyperactive kid with violent tendencies, but was now much calmer and more active in his church. Jackie was shy, had a lisp, and was known to be slow, but he was athletic and constantly spent time with Ted, a husky, gregarious man who some said lacked common sense. Gary was perhaps the most resourceful yet, also the most impaired member of the group. He regularly took stelazine and cogentin to control his schizophrenia, and he had a history of criminal behavior before he began taking medication. Nevertheless, his doctor believed him to be a model patient, and he seemed to be living a good life after joining the community at Gateway. Given their history of friendship and the skills they developed at work and in the military, what happened after the boys left the market makes no sense to anyone who has taken an interest in their tale. No one has ever adequately explained what happened to the men that chilly February night. Because all of the friends were adults, it took a few days for the police to start searching for them in earnest. The Yuba County Sheriff's Department put Deputy Jim Harris and Reserve Deputy Jeff Loftus on the case and asked highway patrol officers in neighboring counties to be on the lookout for the boys, who were assumed to be lost. When a Butte County dispatcher called in the report that William Burris, a ranger from the U.S. Forest Service, had found an abandoned vehicle near Oroville, they finally had a lead. On Tuesday, February 28th, the cops found Jack Madriga's two-door Mercury Montego on a rough, deserted mountain road 70 miles from Chico at an elevation of over 4,000 feet. It had been headed away from the Oroville-Quincy Highway in the opposite direction of the normal route back to Yuba City, ending up in the Plumas National Forest. The car was stuck in the snow, even though it should have been easy for the five friends to dig it out or push it free. The doors were unlocked and the keys were missing, but the car still had plenty of gas in its tank. One window was partially rolled down. When police hot-wired the car, it started right away. They also found a map of California in the glove compartment and wrappers from the snacks the guys bought at the market. Stranger yet, police noted that the car's undercarriage was completely clean, even though the road was unpaved and extremely rugged. The low-hanging muffler was unblemished by mud or dents, as if the driver had known how to avoid every bump and pothole. This scenario made no sense to Jack's family, who said that he would never let anyone else drive the car and had no reason to be on that road. As far as anyone knew, none of his friends had been on that road either. In the mountains where the police found the car, the temperature had dropped below freezing. When the boys left for the game, they were wearing jeans, light jackets, and sneakers. They weren't dressed for the snowy conditions they encountered. Over the next 5 days, police and rangers searched the forest but found no sign of Jack, Billy, Jackie, Ted, or Gary. When a snowstorm moved in, it covered any tracks that could have been left by people or animals in the area. The snow drifts grew higher, and the rescuers' snowcats nearly got stranded themselves, putting a stop to the mission. During the search, a man named Joseph Shans had reached out to the police, believing he had seen the men Friday night when he had also been stranded nearby. Joe, who was in his mid-50s, had been driving up the same road on his way to his cabin when his Volkswagen Beetle got stuck in the snow. As he tried to get his car free, he had a mild heart attack. Although his story sounded a bit fishy, it gave the police something to go on. Joseph first told the police that after he fell ill, he climbed back into his car to stay warm. At around 11:30, he saw the headlights of a car and a pickup truck on the road behind him. He tried to get them to help him, but instead the vehicle stopped and the passengers all climbed into the truck and drove away. Joseph slept in his car, then walked back down the road to a nearby lodge called Mountain House the next morning, about 9 miles away. Later on, Joseph's story changed somewhat when he mentioned that he had heard a whistling noise while he was in his car. When he looked up, he thought he saw a woman with a baby, surrounded by a bunch of men standing in the road lit by headlights. When he called out for help, the people drove away. He thought they may have come back a few hours later when he woke up and saw flashlight beams shining outside. But when he called for help, the lights went out and no one responded. Eventually, Joseph's car ran out of gas, but fortunately, he had recovered enough to go get help. Although Joseph's stories didn't completely add up, a woman who owned a store about an hour away from Jack's abandoned Mercury said she had seen 5 men in a red pickup truck that weekend. 2 of them had come in to buy food, while another one made a phone call and the other sat in the truck. Unfortunately, these witness accounts were never conclusive. Neither Joseph Shans nor the woman at the store were ever determined to have any further connection to the case. Given the weather conditions, the police didn't have much to follow up on. There was no new information coming in, and the search would stall for months until the snow finally started to melt on the mountains. Finally, in late spring, the boys' families received some news about their sons when a group of bikers made a grisly discovery. On Sunday, June 4th, 1978, a man named Loren Koch and his teenage son and their friend William Rameau took their motorcycles up the Oroville-Quincy Highway through the Plumas National Forest. As they made their way, they encountered some fallen trees and melting snow drifts that blocked their path and had to take a detour. Near the Daniel Zink campground, they passed by some Forest Service trailers, also surrounded by snow and fallen timber, about 12 miles northeast of the spot where Jack's blue car had been abandoned. One of the 30-foot trailers had a bad door, and when Roger went to check it out, he saw that the window had been broken from the outside. When he looked inside, he thought he saw a body on the bottom of a bunk bed near the window and called out to the others. The group got back on their motorcycles and rode to Oroville to tell the police what they had found. Around 9:45 that night, they stopped at a Denny's restaurant and called the Butte County Sheriff's Department, who sent someone out to investigate. The next day, police from Butte, Plumas, and Yuma counties arrived at the trailer and found a body inside, wrapped up in 8 sheets. It turned out to be Ted Wire. He was dressed in the same clothes he had worn the night he had gone missing, but his beard had grown wild before he died. Ted's shoes were gone from his frostbitten feet, and some of his toes were missing. He seemed to have starved to death, as he was nearly 100 pounds lighter than he had been on the night of the game. Even stranger, his arms were crossed over his chest, which suggested that someone else had wrapped him in the sheets, although there was no other sign of foul play. Later on, an autopsy would show that Ted died from exposure and pulmonary congestion about 8 to 13 weeks after arriving at the trailer. As police continued their search, they found a nickel ring engraved Ted on the table near the bunk, as well as his wallet, which still had money inside of it. They also found a gold Waltham watch with a missing crystal whose owner was unknown. Things only got weirder from there. There were empty military C-ration cans near Ted's body, and a year's supply of unopened food and freeze-dried meals in a storage shed outside. Only 36 of the meals had been eaten. The heating stoves for the food were unused. As police searched the area near the trailer's back door, they found another sheet, a sock, and some books. When they went back inside, they found Gary Mathias's sneakers. The scene wasn't making any sense. There was no sign of the other boys, but it looked like someone had broken into a tool shed, even though they left another shed that contained a generator alone. Ted could have started a fire with the books, furniture, and matches in the trailer, but there was no sign that he had tried. There was even a propane tank that could have provided heat, but no one had turned on the gas. Later, Yuba County Lieutenant Lance Ayers remarked that all they had to do was turn that gas on, and they'd have had gas to the trailer and heat. Less than a mile northeast of the trailers, by the side of the road, police found a flashlight and 3 wool blankets. Given everything they found, and even considering the men's disabilities, if 2 of them had arrived at the trailer together, there was no reason they should have starved or frozen to death. The following morning, a group of searchers found the remains of Bill and Jack 3 miles away from the campground in the Granite Basin area. Jack's body was lying face up near a stream, showing signs of being eaten by animals. His right hand was wrapped around his watch and his car keys were in his pocket. Bill's bones were found across the road, scattered over a wooden area measuring about 50 square yards. Searchers also found his wallet and identification at the scene. On June 8th, Jack Hewitt Sr. found his son Jackie's remains about a quarter mile away from the trailer. When he discovered Jackie's jacket, a piece of bone fell to the ground as he picked up the garment. The next day, an officer from Plumas County found a skull about 100 yards away, and the teeth were used to identify the body. When everything was said and done, autopsies indicated that Ted, Bill, Jack, and Jackie had all died from exposure. Despite continued efforts, Gary Mathias never turned up. Police believed that he might have taken Ted's leather shoes and walked onto the road or into the forest. The parents of the Yuba City Five were devastated by the news of their son's death and disappearances. Sadly, many of their questions about what happened will be forever unsolved. John Thompson, a special agent from the California Department of Justice, called the case, quote, bizarre with no explanations and 1,000 leads. Every day you've got 1,000 leads, end quote. Jack's mother was convinced that the boys must have been led astray by a malevolent force. They wouldn't have fled off in the wood, she claimed. We can't visualize someone getting the upper hand on those 5 men, but we know it must have been. There's no telling how or why the boys drove up the mountain and got lost there. Did they take a wrong turn? Did they stop to help someone out, only to be lured into the forest? Some of the family members think that Jack's car must have been forced off the main road against his will, because he was familiar with the drive and had many chances to turn around and head back to Yuma County. The change in altitude would have also indicated they were going the wrong way. And how did the men end up at the campground? Had they entered the trailer together? There are a few theories as to how the friends could have met their unfortunate end, but no one knows for certain how it happened. Perhaps, despite taking his medication earlier in the week, Gary had experienced a psychotic break and taken over the car, eventually leading his friends to their doom. It's also possible that the boys actually did encounter some other drivers who meant them harm and used the woman with the baby as a means of gaining their sympathy and attention. Or maybe the boys found themselves on a misguided adventure, wound up on private property, and been too afraid to ask for help. Whatever happened to Gary, Ted, Bill, Jack, and Jackie that night, the story of these 5 friends is certainly heartbreaking and unlucky. They had loving families, wonderful friendships, and everything to look forward to. Despite their disabilities, they were living full, happy lives, cut short too soon. Wherever their souls landed, we hope they're resting in peace.